The Texas Tribune Festival will celebrate big, bold ideas from the worlds of politics, policy, and beyond. September 22nd through the 24th in Austin. More information at tripfest.org.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcy Martinez, Director of Public Relations and Corporate Communications here at DHR Health. And it's so great to see so many familiar faces, not just up here on stage, but out here in the audience. We hope you're enjoying your lunch. And on behalf of DHR Health, I would like to welcome you to our beautiful conference center here in the beautiful city of Edinburgh. I know the mayor's here. That's a shout out to you, Mayor. And DHR Health is proud to partner with the Texas Tribune for this very important and informative event. And we are so gracious to our legislators for taking the time to be here. We know how busy you are, and we appreciate you. DHR Health is proud to be the only Level 1 trauma center south of San Antonio. We continue to bring the highest level of healthcare to the Valley at every opportunity because these are our family members, our neighbors, our loved ones. So we are here for you at DHR Health. Have a great discussion, everyone.
Marcy, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to echo Marcy's welcome. I'm Evan Smith. I'm the CEO of the Texas Tribune. I want to welcome you to today's event. We call it Inside the Interim, a conversation with 3 state lawmakers from the Rio Grande Valley. We're going to talk today about the last legislative session, this election season, and the next legislative session just around the corner. The issues in play that affect the constituents of these 3 legislators and this community. What happened last year, what's likely to happen this year, and what could happen next year when the House and Senate are back in Austin for another 140 days. Let's hope it's not more than 140 days this time. Thank you so much for joining us in person, and we have a number of people watching us also at home online. Words I have said many times. In fact, I said them yesterday in Brownsville at another event that we did there. It is great to be in the Rio Grande Valley. Just before the pandemic shut everything down, what seems to me like a million years ago, we were right here on this stage at this very events venue for one of our last full-day Texas Tribune events. It was a symposium on the future of healthcare. If only we could have known back in January of 2020 what was coming. 31 months later, I have to tell you, it is great to be back on the road, and it is especially great to be back here. We at the Tribune now for 13 years have always believed in the importance of public convenings, getting people like you in a room like this one, and being participants in a conversation like the one we're about to have today. This is aligned with our public service mission, which is to raise the level of civic engagement in communities and in this state, and also to make the conversation around politics and issues more civil. More civil. Imagine that. These are very challenging times, especially heading into an election. We're all polarized. Policy debates and political fights are happening every time you pick your head up. But we know that this state we love, Texas, is better when we come together to talk out loud about the things we can agree on, the things that advance the cause of what we know to be the most important values of Texas. So I want to thank you all for being part of our return to live journalism. Before we begin, echoing Marcy, I want to welcome you on behalf of DHR and thank our friends from DHR, Mr. Alonso Cantu, Ms. Susan Turley, Dr. Carlos Cardenas, and everybody here. They're great colleagues. This is, I think, the 6th or 7th event that we have done in this venue over time. They have been wonderful hosts. Please give them a hand, acknowledge their generosity in hosting us. I also want to thank the sponsors of today's event, Texas Regional Bank, Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas, the Texas Association of Community Colleges, and Raise Your Hand Texas, as well as our media partners, KRGV and KURV. Here's the drill. If you've been to one of our events before, you know what I'm going to say. My guest and I will talk for about 40 minutes. Then we're going to open up the floor for questions from all of you. We have mics on the side of the room. On either side, we may walk those microphones around, but we want you to bring your questions to this group after I've had my time with them, because I know you're going to have even better things to ask them than I will. I'll make sure to work in some of the pre-submitted questions that many people watching at home have sent in as well, and then we'll wrap at the 1 hour mark at 1 o'clock. Okay, now I'm pleased to introduce the state senator and 2 state representatives who have kindly agreed to join us today to talk about the state of our state. Chuy Hinojosa, Democrat of McAllen, first elected to represent Senate District 20 in 2002. In the 87th legislative session, he is vice chair of the Finance and Jurisprudence Committees, sits on the Natural Resources and Economic Development, Criminal Justice, Transportation, and Border Security Committees. Born in McAllen, he has an undergraduate degree from the University of Texas at Pan American and a law degree from Georgetown University. Oscar Longoria, Democrat of Mission, in his 5th term, that's my count, right? 5? This is it, 5th term, representing House District 35. In the 87th session, he sits on the House County Affairs and Energy Resources Committees. Born in Mission, he's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Texas Law School. Finally, Armando Martinez. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but this is the first event we've done together, is it not? First event. I'm so happy to have him finally on stage. Armando Martinez, Democrat of Weslaco, in his 9th term representing House District 39. This session, he sits on the Culture, Recreation, and Tourism and Transportation Committees. He is a native of Weslaco, has an undergraduate degree from UT Pan American and a master's degree from the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Lawmakers, welcome. Please give them a hand. Thank them all for joining us today. So I'll start with Senator Hinojosa, thinking about where we are on the calendar. This is the last day that abortion will be legal in Texas. Tomorrow, the trigger bill passed by the legislature that all 3 of you voted against takes effect following the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court. Obviously, Texas had nothing to do with the Roe v. Wade decision. That was a Mississippi case that was the impetus, but we are where we are. Tomorrow is the day that the trigger law goes into effect, and abortion is set to be illegal in Texas. Senator Hinojosa, what, if anything, do legislators do about that? What do people in this audience who may be concerned about that? There are people in this audience, surely, who are cheering over that. This is an issue that divides communities. But what do you think about that fact as a legislator heading into tomorrow?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion. Sure. And I'll talk about abortion because abortion is a very emotional, personal issue for women. Here in the Rio Grande Valley, the majority of families are Catholic. I think in general, the majority of people do not support abortion. But there's a contradiction built in because I think the majority of people would support Roe versus Wade. I don't think they wanted it overturned completely the way it was. So what do we do about it? Here in the Texas legislature, there's not much we can do about it for the simple reason that the majority of legislators supported legislation that passed and triggered the legislation that will go into impact and effect today. So that's an issue that the general public needs to speak up about, and they have, in terms of people that have been elected to public office.
Yeah, Representative Martinez, this is an issue that is decided, right? Was decided. Your mic should be on. I hope it is, and great, and we'll unmute it. The issue has been decided by the last legislature. If anything, the next legislature has telegraphed its intentions, people in the majority, to go farther, to actually put additional measures in place to restrict access. From the perspective of your district, your constituents, what do you think about this as we head into tomorrow?
Well, I think whoever the majority is going to be the one that controls that narrative. And the way it looks right now is the majority that's in place has already passed something in the past legislative session. I think their intentions are to pass something this next legislative session. And I think other than being open and expressing what a lot of women feel, I think that their intention is probably going to pass, and they are going to continue to push social issues instead of entertaining and looking at the issues that really concern Texans, which is education, healthcare, safety, things that are important to Texans, but they're moving towards a more social than something that actually impacts people on a daily basis. Yeah.
Representative Longoria, what Senator Hinojosa said is undeniably correct. For a lot of people, the way they regard this issue is through the lens of faith, right? There are people of faith who may think, I'm a Democrat temperamentally, I may vote on a lot of the issues that Democratic candidates support, but on this issue, because of my faith, it's not quite so clear-cut. So it's interesting to have the conversation we're having today in the Valley, it would be different to have this conversation, say, in Austin, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. So I'm Catholic, I have faith, but I still believe there's a separation between church and state.
Yeah.
And a lot of the decisions I make are based on my faith, but ultimately they're contingent on what my constituents want. The majority of Texans elected those House members and those senators. And if they feel that's important to them and that's something that they want to do, and frankly, I don't agree with an absolute ban. I think you need to really look at it in a broader scope. I mean, there's definitely some instances where you have to kind of examine it. You know, you have 8, 9-year-olds, incest, rape. I mean, those are issues you really have to look at. But I think agreeing with what Representative Martinez said, if things don't change and the majority doesn't change, or not even so much the majority, but the ideology, right? I mean, because you could have Republican members and senators, you know, look at it from a lens where maybe there should be some exceptions, maybe there should not, but it's the majority of the state. What does the majority of the state want to do? And if the majority of the state wants to continue going into this direction where we have an absolute ban and maybe make things harder, well, hopefully they vote in that manner. And if they don't, hopefully they vote in the manner that is more aligned with what their personal interests are.
Right.
I mean, we're just vehicles for our constituents.
So you called out your constituents. Have you done polling in your district? Do you have a sense of how your constituents feel about this? Do you think that your vote against the legislation last session that put us where we are today was in line with what your constituents wanted?
Based on the calls that my district office received in the letters, I
Right.
think it was in line with what my constituents wanted.
Yeah. Representative Martinez, another issue where, again, depending upon where you are in the state, there may be a different view of it is guns, right? We're a couple of months out from the Uvalde shooting, which is the worst mass shooting at a school in the history of the state. We know that there have been calls for restrictions on access to some kinds of guns by some people. The legislature, members of the legislature who've spoken up on this so far have indicated that their interest is in mental health policy as the focus, as opposed to any kind of legislation around guns. Unlike the El Paso and Odessa shootings in 2019, when both the governor and lieutenant governor made noise, at least, about red flag laws and the possibility of reforms on gun policy, there have been no such calls from the top this time. Are we just essentially going to head into the next session without a more full-throated discussion about this issue? Is this where we are, do you think?
Yeah, you know, I have to say that it is a complete disappointment that we have not addressed this issue. I mean, when you have a governor that called a special session on social issues, when you had a governor that called a special session on election issues because of a big lie, you did not have a governor who's stepping up to protect our children and protect our teachers. My wife is an educator, and to protect our children within their classrooms. And I think it is a complete disappointment that we're not having that. And we should be having those discussions, because when you had a concealed handgun license laws in place, which my wife and I were concealed handgun license carriers, 34% of the population did not pass that in order for them to have a concealed handgun license. Now, that 34% of the population can now go purchase a weapon without any type of background. So that is something that is a disappointment. That's something that concerns me and a lot of us.
And so your wife is a teacher. So one of the calls after Uvalde was that we arm teachers, that the answer to making students more safe was to put guns in the hands of teachers. Does your wife want to be responsible for protecting the students in her classroom?
She wants to be responsible for protecting the children, but not to be carrying a weapon.
Not that way.
Right, not in that manner.
Right. Senator Hinojosa, there are a lot of people in this community who are for the Second Amendment, are gun owners, are responsible gun owners. How does this issue play down here? You've been in office longest of the people on stage, representing folks from down here.
The feedback I get from talking to my constituents and also my experience, being a United States Marine Corps Vietnam veteran, what I hear is that they want sensible gun safety laws. For example, you cannot purchase a gun unless you're 21 years old, but yet if you're 18, you can purchase a military assault weapon that's for mass destruction and mass killings. Number two, we need to change that and increase the age to 21. I think the other issue has to do with what is called red flag laws, where you identify someone that has problems, mental health issues, or other challenges, and that person has guns. Provide a due process, a way to take away those guns for a temporary period, and then give them back when it's safe to give the gun owner back his guns. I think the third thing is very issue is dealing with what I call criminal background checks. We did away with that last session. Anybody go buy a gun without you being check as to your criminal background. So there is a real issue, a real problem that we have. So we look forward next session to introduce those bills and have a very lively debate on the Senate floor on these issues that are really being pushed hard by the vast majority of families that want to see common sense gun safety laws.
Representative Longoria, this is the question. Senator teed it up perfectly. This is supposed to be a representative democracy where people in your position represent the people back home and their points of view. If you look at public polling on this issue, more than a majority, I would even describe it as an overwhelming majority, support some kind of stepped-up background checks. There are polls that show that the public overwhelmingly supports a ban on high-capacity magazines, a ban on bump stocks that allow guns to be turned into more dangerous weapons. The red flag laws, polling has shown that a majority supports that. But the legislature has not acted in line with the polling that we've seen on this issue. So where's the disconnect?
Unfortunately, this happened, so there's going to be a discussion. I mean, I can speak from being a father of two little girls, 10 and 7, that, post-Uvalde, and now I have to think, are my girls safe at school? And I think it's a question that a lot of parents are asking themselves and families, right? The fact that you can be 18 and buy an assault rifle, but you can't buy a handgun is definitely a question that we really need to ask ourselves.
Or a beer.
Exactly, or a beer. And I understand military service. I think possibly increasing the age on assault rifles to 21, having certain exemptions for, sportsmen or women or, military. But I think to give an 18 or 19-year-old an assault rifle is very dangerous, could be very dangerous. And if you look at the studies, you seem to see a pattern where it's, 13 to 20, unfortunately, usually men that have had some psychological issues. It's kind of a constant. And
so in the case of the Uvalde thing, Representative, so the red flag law that Senator Hinojosa referred to might actually have made a difference in this case. The raising the age may have made a difference in this case.
I think it would. And then you also look, an absolute ban. I think an absolute ban is nearly impossible because we have so many firearms out already in communities. So I think you have to revamp things, look as time's evolving. I think we need a hardened schools. What does that look like? I think we need a lot of input to be able to make a decision. We need to make teachers feel safe. We need to make sure kids are safe and that parents feel safe that their kids are going to school. You put that along with the issues of being able to attack a problem quickly where you see a student or someone that may be disgruntled and is facing some issues that may backlash at the community in a form of doing a mass shooting and trying to prevent that. Unfortunately, I think it's a question of, it's not if it's going to happen again, it's when.
Well, in fact, after it happened a whole bunch more times in the next 2 weeks to the point that we kind of have moved on, right?
I think as a legislator, we need to make sure when we enter that chamber, when we leave the chamber, we made choices and decisions and possibly pass laws that are making the state safer, especially for the children going to school.
Representative Martinez, this is my question to you and yours. The legislature has the ability during a session to put things on the ballot for voters to, in that November or the following year, put their hands up on, right? We've done this before. We did this with a couple of transportation issues that ultimately became sort of baked into the cake from the budget perspective. We did this with water and the mechanism that created the SWIFT some years ago. We just saw in Kansas a couple of weeks ago on the abortion issue, voters were given the opportunity to go up or down on a complete ban. Do you have any doubt that if the issue of guns or the issue of abortion were on the ballot and voters were able to put their hands up or down on that, what the outcome would be?
I mean, I have no doubt that people are going to go out and vote and they will support it the way they want. I mean, if it's polling and you see that the majority of people are supporting one thing over another,
you'd think they would vote that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we should give them the opportunity to do that. But with that said, when it comes to something like guns and safety, I think that's something that we should do and tackle as a legislature and address immediately.
Take your responsibility
Absolutely.
for that, actually, right now. Senator Hinojosa, let me switch over to something that we did not know at the beginning of last session would be an issue, but we came to discover immediately was, and that's the grid. The ability of the state to provide power to its residents. We had the collapse of the grid in February of 2021, and then the legislature took some action. Governor, after the session was over, said, we fixed it, nothing more to be done. So we're here a year out. We've had very hot weather in Texas, especially in a region like this one, concerns about whether the grid is going to hold up. There's predictions already that the winter may be colder than it normally is. You have any concerns about whether you did enough on the grid?
Yes. I don't think we did enough on the grid. We made some reforms, made some changes in completely replacing the PUC membership, reformed ERCOT, all the members who operate and manage the grid. But the reality is that at that time, many of the gas producers and generators owners made $11 billion in profit in a very short period of time. And we had legislation to try to put back some of that money back into the pockets of users, of the consumers. And we were unable to do that. But here's what happened. In there, we also have a requirement to be able to weatherize generators, to weatherize power plants. The problem is that we did not mandate that reform. We left it up to the regulatory agencies to have the businesses or the generators and the gas companies do it at their own pace.
Yeah.
It's a real problem. So we also failed to connect the Texas grid to the national grid, which would have been a huge plus and saver in terms of energy for us here in Texas. But we don't need the energy. We can sell the extra energy to the national grid.
And if the grid collapses, you can get energy from other places to help
Correct.
to save off the trouble.
And those are very basic reforms that we need to take up again this coming session. Otherwise, we will again probably end up having another collapse of the grid.
Representative Longoria, there's nothing in the state of Texas, at least as you talk to people in leadership today, that they hate more than mandate. Well, maybe California they hate more than mandates, but mandates are a close second, right? What the senator is talking about was an unwillingness on the part of state leaders, including members of the legislature, to require these providers to weatherize. It was made voluntary, and it was left, I believe he's referring to the Railroad Commission, which is the regulator of oil and gas, to essentially ensure that that took place. I've heard some complaints that maybe it's taken a while and that it isn't, in fact, happening on the pace that we may need to feel secure.
For the providers, I think energy, especially in Texas, is something that always needs to be kept in check. My understanding, a lot of those plants were set up for hurricanes. Right? I mean, Texas is a big state, planet Texas. Right. You go to one part of the state, completely different climate from the other part. So when you have weatherization based on hurricanes, it looks very different than based on extreme cold. And based on climate, based on changes, you constantly have to keep adapting. So I think the providers, which are providing a service, it's not free. I mean, it's being charged to all Texans.
Yep.
Have a duty to all Texans to make sure that they continue to provide power, especially, so that we don't have situations like we had, this past storm where people ended up dying. I mean,
so you would have mandated that they weatherize.
You ask them, you keep them in check, and then the question is, you don't want to mandate because then they say, well, we can't do what you're asking us to do. Well, have discussions with them, robust conversations where you ask the providers, okay, why can't you adapt?
Why couldn't they have done it if you had mandated?
Well, what I heard was that there's issues where you weatherize something for extreme heat or extreme cold, and then it's very difficult to switch to the other one way or the other. Right. So was it a cost issue? Are you not making enough because we think you are? And you need to address this. There needs to be
Plus,
a
you have a $250 billion state budget over 2 years. You could find the money. You find the money for a lot of other stuff.
You can find the money, but I think you want to make sure as a state it's not an ongoing obligation. And it's like, is it going to be a one-time lump where we're going to go ahead and provide this and they're going to fix it? Or are you going to keep coming back every biennium asking for more money to continue to fix things?
Senator, before we go to Representative Martinez. Yes,
I got to make a quick point. They made $11 billion in profit. They cannot come and say us, well, we don't have the money. Let me tell you, that is wrong when they come and tell us they don't have the money. $11 billion in profits. They could have used a lot of that money to start the weatherization, and they could make that up on a long-term basis. It's capital investment, issue bonds, securitization. The private sector has means of financing the weatherization of the power plants and the gas generators.
Representative Martinez, my memory, and you'll correct me, and Senator Hinojosa correct me if I'm wrong, is that it was the Senate that was pushing the issue of clawing back that money. The House and the Senate were not in agreement. Should the House have joined the Senate in requiring those providers to give back some of that money?
Absolutely, 110%.
So why didn't the House do it?
I can't answer for the rest of my colleagues that had made that decision.
But you were for it.
I am 110% for it, especially when you talk about people who recently are receiving their power bills and saying that it's over $400 or $500 and they can't pay that.
Yeah.
There has to be some way to reimburse these people for the expenses that they've made.
So, every legislature you come in and you think we're going to talk about the two biggest line items in the budget, which are, depending upon the year you're talking about it or the odd numbered year, it's either public education and healthcare or healthcare and public education. Those are the two biggest lines. I mean, you've been a member of the Finance Committee for forever. Representative Longoria, you were Vice Chair of Appropriations for a period. You both know, as part of the budget process, it's public ed and healthcare. Heading into the last session, we knew that there was a pandemic. We didn't know there was a grid. But the session played out the way that it did. Representative Longoria, did you do enough on public education and healthcare in your mind, the two biggest and arguably the most important subjects, but the two biggest in the budget?
It's a very difficult question because I don't think you ever do enough. I think it's one of those where
all right, let me back it up and make it easy. Did you do anything?
Yes. I mean, we made changes. We put more money in pub ed. We try to adapt and change, making sure, we looked at the pandemic, post-pandemic. What does it look like? Now we may have to deal with pandemics. We made changes. Healthcare, it allowed us to look at a telemedicine where prior legislative sessions, it was something that was kind of viewed small, and it kind of expanded that. So we're constantly evolving as a state. But I think when we get to Austin, I mean, we're only there for 5-6 months, and we only have a certain amount of time to really get things done. So the question is, are we going to go and deal with issues that we're going to argue on, that really it's I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, or are we going to go and do things that the state needs, which is basically stuff having to do with infrastructure, pub ed, and healthcare?
I mean, a cynical view, and far be it for me as a journalist to be up here as a cynic, right? Mm-hmm. But the cynical view is you found time to do the abortion legislation. You found time to do an overhaul of voting laws that questionable whether it's easier or harder to vote now. You found time to tell teachers what they could and couldn't teach, student athletes which sports they could and couldn't play. I mean, you seem to find a lot of time to do other stuff. So it's not about the time that you're in Austin, right?
I agree with you, but remember, I am one of 150. There's 150 of us in the House and 31 senators, right? So what do their constituents want? So I can't speak for what my colleague wants in Northeast Texas.
You only represent your district.
I represent my district, and I will vote my district, so it makes things very difficult. Now, if in the aggregate we want that, it may get done. It will get done, right? Yeah. But it's just, what does the entire state, other than District 35, want?
Representative Martinez, what I'm thinking about on the healthcare thing specifically is that Texas has been for a very long time the state with the largest number of its residents, both the raw number and the percentage, without access to health insurance. Let me say it that way. We have an access to care problem, but I'm talking about access to coverage. During the pandemic, it got significantly worse, in part because we still tie in this country health insurance to your job, and a lot of people lost their jobs during the pandemic, and so the number of people who lost their health insurance also grew. We are at double or more than double the national average in uninsured residents of Texas versus the rest of the country, and we're more than double the number of uninsured children in Texas versus the rest of the country. Representative Martinez, the opportunity to expand Medicaid came up again, as it does every 2 years, but your colleagues turned it away. What's going on with that issue, and is there going to be any different conversation about that, you think, next time?
I think it's very simple. There's a lot of people that place politics in front of people and politics in front of healthcare. When you have a state that's ranked last in healthcare, last in education, I think there's a concern. With a state that is the 9th largest global economy, we should be first in healthcare, first in education. And what is it? The fact that we did not want to receive over $2 billion from our federal government because we're too afraid that it was tied to the Obama administration. That's exactly what it was. How do we lower premiums? We receive that money. How do we lower premiums? We expand Medicaid. So when people have issues to where they lose their jobs, they lose their benefits, they have access to health care. My community is one of the largest ones that has a lack of access to health care.
The counties along the border, let's say, I think, of the top 5 most uninsured counties in the whole country, 4 of the 5 are along the Texas-Mexico border, right? So this is important specifically for your community, for your constituents. Senator Hinojosa, this is, again, a case where we hate California more than anything. The reality is that if we don't take our tax dollars back in the form of Medicaid expansion, those dollars go to pay for health care in other states, including California. So it's a question of whether we're willing to take what is already our money back. Now, what Representative Martinez says is true. The concern is that we have strings attached to that money that we don't want to be responsible for. you would expand Medicaid tomorrow if you could.
I support the expansion of Medicaid. I support the expansion of the Affordable Care Act. That's $10 billion additional money every year just for health care.
Right.
The strings that are being attached are really minor in when you weigh the regulations compared to the benefits in healthcare that we will receive.
Right.
Keep in mind that when we don't provide health insurance or provide health care to many families who are not covered, we still pay for it. They end up in the emergency room, or our insurance rates go up to pay for their medical costs. So there's always a cost involved.
Well, in fact, the uncompensated care costs, they go to the emergency room, they will not be turned away, but they show up back in everybody's property tax bill, do they not? I mean, those costs are passed along to all of us.
Well, there's a cost all the way across the board in society. When you have kids who are sick and they don't have a way to get medical health care, they miss school. When you have people that can't go to work because
Right.
they're sick and can't see a doctor, they miss work, and it hurts the economy, also hurts the family, forces them into welfare. So those are very important issues and factors that we need to consider.
Yeah. I've got two people on stage who sit on transportation committees, Representative Martinez in the House, Senator Hinojosa in the Senate. Let me ask the two of you specifically. The big federal infrastructure bill that was largely a partisan vote, there were some Republicans who voted for it, but most Democrats, that is going to send a bunch of money for broadly defined infrastructure. It's not just things like roads and bridges, but it's also water infrastructure and broadband and all that. Senator Hinojosa, is that a good thing for Texas, the federal infrastructure bill?
It is a very good thing for us here in Texas. We are one of the fastest growing states in the nation. We have 1,200 people a day moving to Texas. Many of our bridges are outdated and need repair and replacement. We need to expand our highways. We also have issues with our water infrastructure. As you well know, we're going through a drought. So what do we do with that? We need to again expand on the resources to be able to find ways to increase desalination, find ways to increase desalination that also brackish water, find ways to be able to increase the reservoir capacity. So that is a very good bill for us in Texas. It's about $37 billion. They'll be able to leverage with the money that we have here in the state of Texas, where it's about $31 billion every session, including the Prop 7 and Prop, I think, 5.
Prop 1, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Representative Martinez, same question to you. Is this good for Texas? And let me observe that when that bill passed and there was discussion of that money coming to Texas, the governor put his hand up and said, don't take stuff that's going to have strings attached. He was cautioning state agencies about accessing that money for fear that, again, the big bad federal government's going to tell us what to do.
Well, we understand what that process did, especially when it affected people who had COVID and lost their jobs, right, with healthcare. So let's talk about infrastructure. The most important thing is to receive any type of money we can to improve the infrastructure here in the Rio Grande Valley. We talk about roads, we talk about drainage, we talk about water. Those are important parts of infrastructure, and the valley continues to expand, especially when you think about the population. But not only because of population, but because you have vertical and horizontal construction that continues, right? So with that, you need to have the right infrastructure in place, and you need to have the money to do it. The Mid-Valley was victim to about 3 torrential rains, which a lot of people were displaced from their businesses, a lot of people were displaced from their homes, and there has not been anybody from the higher echelon talking about how to improve that. How do we improve it? We get the money from our federal government, and we improve those important issues that affect the Mid-Valley and the Valley in general.
Okay. Representative Longoria, let me move the conversation briefly to the election season that we're in. So we're some number of months out from Election Day. And as you know, since the 2020 election, when Republicans fared better in South Texas than they had 4 years before, there's been a narrative that the Valley is becoming more Republican. There is a reddening going on down here. I'm not entirely sure that the facts line up exactly this way, but when Mayra Flores won the special election in District 34, special elections are different than regular elections in terms of turnout and everything else, but that was like, aha, suspicions confirmed. This is what's happening. Ryan Guillen, your colleague, switched parties after the last election. Like, there are things going on down here. Do you believe that we're going to see in 2022 a continuing of this trend? How do you read the tea leaves in terms of whether this premise is an accurate premise or not?
Well, I agree with you on the special elections are anomalies. I think it's very hard to gauge,
Right.
an elections going forward by a special election. But I really don't. I don't think things will change. I think the majority of the demographics down in South Texas are aligned with the Democratic Party, and I just feel that folks that live here are more aligned with the Democratic Party. Now, I welcome people being able to have a choice. They should. I mean, that's what we're founded on. But what's kind of ironic is a lot of the people running as Republicans don't want anybody to know they're Republicans. They won't put Republican on their sign, and they don't, pass out propaganda saying that they're Republican. So I think they're trying to maybe offer a choice, but they don't want to own up to it. So I think that's kind of ironic and kind of interesting to look at. So because of all that, I think, ultimately South Texas will continue to be Democratic. I think that's what South Texas wants.
Right. Senator, you and I have talked about this many times over the years, and we've talked about it actually while I've been in the Valley this time, that South Texas is arguably small c conservative, if not big C conservative, right? There's nothing wrong with the idea that people in this community may not be the same as Democrats in other places. They're more open to having that conversation.
Well, you are right on point. Rio Grande Valley families are conservative, family-oriented. They're not far left or liberals. And what's happening is the messaging from the Democratic Party is just really off base when they talk about defunding the police up in the east and up in the west coast, when they talk about doing away with oil and gas, when they talk about issues like border security. They're not on point on what's important to the families here in the Rio Grande Valley. But I need to make a point, and this is very important. The Democrats at the national level have never, to my knowledge, ever invested funding to build up infrastructure here in the Rio Grande Valley for the Democratic Party. They take us, Democrats, Hispanics, for granted. They think that because we're Hispanic, we're going to vote Democrat or we're going to vote liberal, and that's not the case. The Republicans, and I got to give them credit for that, they have investing quite a bit of money here in the Rio Grande Valley.
And they're showing up, Senator. They're coming down to ask for votes, right?
Well, they put the money where the mouth is, and
But you admit this governor, for instance, has come down to the Valley and prioritized outreach in the Valley more than some previous people in that job, right?
Plus, they have full-time staff down here. My point is this: the messaging by the Democratic Party has been all wrong at the national level, and many of the politics, unfortunately, have been nationalized. For us, we're not like the Democrats up in East Texas or up in California. We are more what I call conservative, centrist type of politics that focus on the bread and butter issues that we put food on our tables, jobs, education, healthcare, and security.
Representative Martinez, let's role play. You be you, I'll be Michelle Vallejo, okay? And I ask you, as Michelle Vallejo, I say, Joe Biden has offered to come down and campaign in my district. Is that a good idea?
Well, in her district?
Yeah.
I mean, if I would welcome it, especially if they're going to come down here and invest some money into the Democratic Party, like our senator says.
Right, but the senator is saying that the national Democrats are kind of upside down in terms of how they think about issues and politics down here. Do you want the national Democrats showing up here? Would that be a help?
I mean, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind if our president would come down here and visit the Rio Grande Valley. Absolutely, I would welcome him, every day that he would be here.
And you'd have him campaign for you in your district?
Absolutely, I sure would.
Representative Longoria, would you have the president campaign for you in your district?
Of course, we'd always welcome to let them know what's going on in South Texas. But I guess echoing what my colleagues have said, South Texas is very different from other parts of the state. I support energy. I support the energy industry. A lot of folks have good paying jobs. My dad works in the energy industry. I support property tax relief, right? And that may be taboo for certain areas of the state to be aligned with the Democratic Party, but that's what it is to be, I believe, a South Texas Democrat. We're just a little bit different. We represent South Texas. We represent our community, family values. A lot of folks are aligned with the Catholic Church. I mean, that's predominantly here in South Texas. I mean, it's just a different area. So to compare us to other areas of the state, I just think some of their ideals are different based on their demographics, right?
You want the president to come and campaign for you?
I think the president is always welcome here in the Rio Grande Valley.
The respect. There was 3 respectful men. I want to really know what they think, though. Yeah.
Well, but I would want President Biden to make better use of his time to come and campaign for me.
Because you're going to win. and you don't need them.
Well, I hope so. I'm
Yeah,
at work
right.
hard to
That
win.
was definitely the implication. That was the vibe that I just got, actually, a second ago from you. Okay. So Representative Longoria mentions property taxes. Let's talk quickly before we go to questions from the audience about next session. So one theory of last session is that the Republicans ran the table. They had a very ambitious agenda, and once they realized that you guys were not going to take back control of the Texas House in 2020, which was like, I remember that being sort of kind of in conversation, they knew they could pretty much do whatever they wanted, and they put everything out there, and they got almost everything they wanted. So I'm trying to think about, well, what's left that was on their agenda for them to do next time? Kind of not anything, really. No, there are things. Representative Longoria, on the property tax question, there are talks going on right now about how they can re-engineer property taxes to reduce the property tax burden. Since the state doesn't levy a property tax, they can't cut a property tax, but they can monkey with the mechanism as they've done in the past. There's a $25 billion surplus potentially, according to the comptroller, and they want to see how they can redirect some of that money to property tax relief. Are you expecting that's on the table?
Of course, I think there's going to be some property tax relief, and frankly, I welcome it. But we got to make sure we don't negatively affect the services that we're currently offering Texans. But like I tell all my constituents, because this is the number one call that we get on property taxes, those rates are set at the local level. Now, whether you look at it, maybe making those elected positions so that there can be some accountability to the constituents, probably something we need to look at. But at the same time, there is a state surplus. We do want to pay down property taxes to give folks relief. But what does that look like? Is that just going to be one biennium? Because then we're going to go back in 2 years, and then we're going to be, in a tough spot. We don't have the money, and now property tax values go up.
Right.
So we have to be very cognitive of that. So really develop a solution or a formula that's going to give meaningful relief going forward. Because frankly, we have to do something. Tax values
how do you define meaningful? I remember the last couple of times that property tax were cut, people did not feel it. They didn't necessarily feel like that cut made a difference.
What was it now? $177, I think, or $176?
Right.
I mean, that's something, but it's not meaningful. We just don't want Texans to be taxed out of their homes. And with what happened with the economy, with all those COVID funds flowing, with all the PPP, with values skyrocketing, it's really creating a mess going forward. Now,
Right.
They'll tell you, well, you can protest your property taxes. Well, you know what? I protest my property taxes. I'm sure a lot of people in this room
do every year with pride.
But there is
Right.
people that don't do it. And it's not because they don't want to. It's just that they don't know, and because it's in fine print. So how do we protect those folks?
Yeah, fair. Representative Martinez, budgets are like elections. It's a choice, not a referendum. And so if you spend $1 on property tax relief, it's $1 you're not spending on public education. Correct. Or $1 you're not spending on health care. Can you say that the most important priority for this state now is not investing more in public ed or investing more in public health after the pandemic, but instead cutting property taxes?
Well, I think we cut property taxes, but I don't think it's the way we've spoken about. Because if everybody in this room remembers 2 sessions ago,
right,
there was a bill to cap revenues, right, for cities and counties. I voted against it. They said it was to lower our property tax.
This was the bill that ultimately said if you raise rates above a certain percentage, you have to go to the voters and get their permission.
Exactly. And not one person has received any relief in property taxes. That's how it was sold, that you were going to see a relief in property taxes,
Right.
which has not happened. So how do we do it? Instead of putting more money into it, and not paying into healthcare or education, which are some of the most important things, which when you talk about property tax relief and healthcare and education, those aren't Republican Democrat issues. Those are issues that affect people of Texas. How do you do it? We talk about appraisals.
Yeah.
And if you lower property tax, the only thing that's going to happen is your appraisals are going to continue to go up to match exactly what you've lost. So there has been no relief, and there will be no relief until we address that issue.
Senator, are you going to, the property tax conversation is in many respects deriving from your side of the Capitol, from the Senate.
Property taxes are too high. We set a limit of 3.5 for counties and cities, and 1.5 for school districts. In the meantime, we made up the difference. If they want to go beyond the 3.5, they have to get the approval of the voters. But the real problem has to do with the appraisal districts. Yeah. There is no restrictions on the appraisal district on increasing the property value. And we need to come back next session and focus on the appraisal district. How do we reform them? How do we rein them in and to pay more attention? Some of the people who are in the appraisal district have been there forever, and they don't even get into the real weeds of the problems that we're facing. The state is also a problem because to the comptroller's office, there has to be a certain increase in property taxes. It has to be met by your local taxing district for the school districts. Otherwise, the state will come and ask you and tell you to increase your property taxes. So yeah, the property taxes is a big issue. I support reforming property taxes all across the board and looking at all the issues in terms of the way we end up setting the tax rates.
Anybody in the room who wants to ask questions of these guys, I've got one more question for them. I'm going to encourage you to go to the microphones, please, on either side, and we'll come to you in 1 second. Senator, the other issue that we hear over and over is going to come up next session is school choice, which is a nice way of saying vouchers, right? This is an issue that's come up many times. Often it's been the House that hasn't even been willing to entertain it to the point of allowing a bill to get to the floor. The votes were not there. It's also one of the rare bipartisan issues in this legislature where you have Republicans from rural communities matching many Democrats and not supporting this. Will this be a live issue next session?
I don't think so. I don't support vouchers. It's a way of taking more money away from a public school system. Vouchers means that we're going to subsidize private schools. Private schools are not transparent, and private schools don't have to admit any student that applies. So no, I think it would be very damaging to a public school system that, quite frankly, needs more funding instead of less funding. We're losing teachers by the thousands all over the state. We are trying to invest right now in our retired teachers. We're appropriating $1 billion every session into the retirement fund for teachers to make it be able to provide them a cost of living increase in the future. So yeah, that's vouchers will not pass. You will have not only the rural Republicans oppose it, but the Democrats. The rural Republicans are very much involved in this issue because it will really destroy the public school systems in the rural areas.
Okay, very quickly, +1 on that, +1 on that. Both
Yes.
agree? Yes, okay. Let's do questions. We're going to go over here, then there, then back and forth. We'll take them until we have to go. Ma'am.
First of all, I'd like to say that I'm a public school teacher and actually took half a day to come here so I could hear all of you.
You're very kind to do that. Thank you.
And I want to say that the Texas legislature does allow school districts the ability to arm their teachers, and that's the Marshall program. However, none of our schools in the RGV actually allow school teachers. I have prior federal law enforcement experience, and up to a few years ago, I couldn't even have my firearm, which I have a concealed handguns license, in the school premises because it wasn't allowed. But back to, one of the things that I'm very concerned about is property taxes. I own a home. My property taxes increased 100% in 1 year. And it's very difficult. But one of the things that you all could do is, again, have our board members of the appraisal district elected. I started going
is that your, I'm sorry, we have to go to a question.
My question
What's your
is,
question?
will
Yes,
you
please.
be introducing something this year in reference to board appraisals?
I know appraisal caps have come up, and the structure of these appraisal boards will. Are you imagining any legislation to overhaul that would come from any of the three of you?
I would support it. I don't know what legislation is going to look like, but definitely support. Those positions should be elected because there needs to be accountability to the constituents of the areas that they represent.
Right.
So we have our chairman Bentecourt from Harris County.
From Houston,
Who used to be, so he will be working on legislation, and I've been communicating with him.
And you'll support it.
I'll support it.
Yeah. And same.
Absolutely.
Yes. Ma'am. Hi. Thank you for your question.
Thank you for your service.
Yes.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Thank you. Okay, Diane Teeter, Professor Emeritus of Biology at South Texas College.
Yes.
And my question has to do with the Texas economy and SB 8, or the Heartbeat Bill. Data by the Institute for Women Policy Research found that the state-level abortion restrictions would cause a loss of $15 billion a year to Texas due to lost labor force participation, time off work, decreased earnings, increased work turnover.
Right.
So in the last session, did the legislation debate anything about cost-benefit analysis, set aside funding for maternal mortality, mental health, child care, or how were the economic consequences of this bill addressed and remedied for women.
Representative Martinez, this is an interesting question because when people have talked about the impact of this legislation on Texas, one thing that people have assumed is that there may be people who simply will not move here, will not relocate their businesses here. People who are here now may decide to leave and go elsewhere. So what about the economic consequences of it?
I mean, I believe that, a lot of that discussion was debated during that bill. Unfortunately, what happens is you have a majority that supported it and that passed it. But a lot of the heated debate, a lot of the debate that was on the floor was discussed on the economic impact of it. Maternal mortality has been an issue that we have been discussing for the past few sessions. And we have a lot of our legislators that have been champions in carrying that. So I think those issues have been discussed, but I think this is an issue to where the women of Texas that have concerns should continue to be a voice and stand up. And let's do something this next legislative session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you. Yes, question, please.
My name is Fern McClarity. I'm with the Owls, and my question is, during the COVID virus, I know that there was a county judge out of Galveston that had asked for the freeze of property values during a disaster like that. Or will y'all look at some type of law to do that? Because the people's businesses were shut down, and it will happen again because they've learned the power. So you will shut down our businesses, but the appraised values kept going up, doubled on some people.
Senator Hinojosa, thank you for your question. This is a good question. So the pandemic was something that none of us had a playbook for going into this. Did we learn things about policies that maybe need to change should there be one of these again, whether it's related to the tax system or the appraisal system or anything else to try to give people relief if this should happen again?
And in the past, we've had legislation introduced where we would freeze the appraisal on property taxes just because many homes were destroyed and many of the businesses were shut down. So yes, I see that type of legislation being refiled again this coming session. We have to work through that process. And I agree that we should not be raising the appraisals and property tax should not be raised when there is a disaster and business shut down and many people have lost their homes.
Representative Longoria, do you think that the legislature did enough for small business, which was so negatively impacted by the pandemic during the last session?
I think there were so many things we were looking at. Probably not. We need to look at that. Going into another session, what Fern just mentioned right now, we need to look at small businesses and make sure they continue to thrive because that is the backbone of the state's economy, right? We need to make sure that people have that independence to be able to open up a shop, be successful, and continue to hire people, pay taxes. So it goes hand in hand with what we want for people to continue to progress. So we need to look at it. We need to make sure we give small business owners relief, whether it's in the form of tax abatements, whether it's in the form of incentives for them to continue to employ folks. We need to do whatever we can to make sure commerce continues to grow. So I think it's something that we'll look at next session, and hopefully we do something positive and continue to help that industry.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for coming up to the mic.
Hi, thank you for hosting this. As we look at the significant COLA that people on Social Security are receiving this year, it's hard not to look at retired public educators and the fact that we have not had a COLA for 18 years, not a single one. So I'd like to know what's going to happen with that this session, and if the legislature is also going to address the extreme discrepancy between our health care and the health care of ERS retirees. Thank you.
Senator Hinojosa.
First of all, and you're right, retired teachers have not received any type of cost of living increase. What we've done is provided a 13 check. I think 3 sessions in a row.
Yes.
And we're probably doing our 13 check coming this session. But here's the real problem with that. The pension fund for the teachers is not actually sound. So we made a commitment, and now we are setting aside $1 billion every session to increase and make it actually sound so we can then provide and look at doing a cost of living increase in statute.
Representative
Yes,
Martinez,
could I please touch on that? So first of all, to our retired teachers, thank you all for all your service that you do. We appreciate that. In every session, I have filed legislation for a cost of living adjustment for our retired teachers, especially when it comes to making sure the actuary is sound. Unfortunately, it's gone on deaf ears. It hasn't passed. maybe because of my political affiliation. But if you go back and you look at my record, every year we have filed that legislation. We're going to continue to do it until we make sure it passes.
Gentleman over there. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is David Diaz. I'm publisher of an online website, Titans of the Texas Legislature, and most people here, including you all, certainly fit that description. My question to everyone is, what do you believe is the impact of DHR Health becoming a level 1 trauma center on the health care in the Valley? And what is the impact, in your opinion, of the Driscoll Children's Hospital of Rio Grande Valley coming to our region?
Opportunity to talk about healthcare in the Valley. Mr. Martinez.
Absolutely. I think that is one of the best things that could happen to the Rio Grande Valley. I'll tell you why. As a paramedic, as a flight paramedic, there was many times that we would have to transport our patients out of the valley to find definitive care. By having DHR as a leader here in healthcare and having our other facilities that are able to provide these services, our patients no longer have to leave the valley. That is a positive impact for the economy, that's a positive impact for healthcare, and that's a positive impact for our communities.
Senator Hinojosa, it does seem to me, again, you've represented this community for a very long time. It does seem to me that the idea that flat is the new up, it's kind of overdue for the Valley to have access to the same basic health care that the rest, like, why is it taking so long for the Valley just to be given essentially the same as everybody else? Not necessarily better, but just the same.
Well, that was years ago. We're getting there with a new medical school. This last session, we had $16 million to upgrade our lab here in DHR and in Starr County in the Valley. In addition to that, we are on the Trauma Level 1 Center. We as the Valley delegation worked to appropriate $6 million to help it become a Level 1 center. So the equipment, medical equipment we now have here in the Valley is state of the art. Not only DHR, but the other hospitals competing against each other has upped the game in terms of providing the surgeries and the medical help that is needed here.
Hello, you go ahead and ask your question. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Flores, and I'm a student here at UHRGV. I'm also part of the student media, so here I am. I'm going to ask my question. This is for Senator Hinojosa. I saw that there was a news release recently on August 18 about you supporting the plan on repealing the sales tax on hygiene feminine products. And I wanted to know in what ways do you plan to support this plan?
It's a good question for the group. This is the so-called tampon tax. This is the legislation that would remove the sales tax on feminine hygiene products. It's been discussed in previous sessions. There's now seeming to be bipartisan support for that. Senator, can you talk about that?
I support doing away with the tax.
Okay.
Just straightforward.
Another thing is that what are the chances, do you think, of the tax being repealed?
I support it 100%, having
Support it.
two little girls, and I think we're heading in the right direction because it seems to have support from the higher ups as well.
I've seen Republicans, Representative Martinez on Twitter saying that they support this, which
Absolutely.
is usually a good sign that this is going to go, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Another thing is that I want to know, like, what is the amount of revenue that is collected from the tax, and what would happen if it's being repealed? Well, how would that be replaced?
Someone in student media asking a follow-up. Good for you. So what will happen to the revenue lost from the question is, where will we replace the revenue is the question.
Well, like anything else, when we give a tax exemption on any item, for example, buying items for hurricane season, it's a tax exempt. We provide many goods before the start of school, the tax exempt. So the taxes are part of the whole overall budget of the state of Texas. Right. So it's not set aside for any particular purpose.
Nothing will suffer as a result of this tax being eliminated. That's the point. Okay. Yes. Hi. Thank you for your question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Colleen de Guzman. I'm a reporter for Kaiser Health News, and I grew up here in the Valley. And 2 years ago, we saw how COVID-19 ravaged our community. And 2 years ago, there was a very different tone here in DHR. And my question is, what are you going to do about addressing the diabetes epidemic here and the obesity epidemic here? Because here in the Valley, we had the same infections rate of COVID-19 here in the Valley compared to Texas, but we had much higher death rates. And I spoke to Dr. Melendez yesterday, and he said the biggest lesson was that we are not addressing our obesity and diabetes epidemic.
Right. So, Senator, the question is, very good question, is the Valley had comparable rates of infection during COVID, but significantly higher death rates. And that's partly because in the Valley, we're not adequately addressing diabetes and obesity as conditions that created, in part, a higher death rate during COVID than in other states. What are we doing? Do we need to be doing more to focus on those issues?
The Rio Grande Valley has a very high rate of diabetes and obesity and infectious diseases. We created the Healthy South Texas program that we fund on a yearly basis to be able to focus on just those three items: diabetes, infectious diseases, and obesity. And it's not those issues cannot be addressed in 1 year or 2 years. It's always.
Do you think you're doing enough?
We never do enough for healthcare. Let me phrase it the way I will put it this way.
Yes.
Are we doing enough? We're doing as much as the system can absorb and take at one time.
I'll let one or the other of you get in on this, and then we're going to wrap.
I agree with Senator 100%. I think the community-based programs that we need to help fund, make sure that they continue to educate the folks that live in South Texas. It is an issue. You got the medical school working on it. You have DHR. I'm sure other providers, Valley Baptist, all involved in making sure that we spread awareness.
Access to healthcare. I think that's the biggest answer to that is access to healthcare and funding healthcare so that people can have that access, because if they don't, they become sicker and then it's too late.
I'm sorry for the people who are lined up for questions. We unfortunately are committed to end at 1, so I apologize. Hopefully you get to ask your questions in another context. I want to thank our panelists, Senator Hinojosa, Representative Longoria, and Martinez. Please give them a hand, acknowledge them for their time today and their willingness to answer hard questions. Thank you to everybody at DHR. Thank you to our sponsors. If you are readers of the Texas Tribune, if you like events like this one, let me encourage you to think about becoming a member of the Tribune, texastribune.org/join. Remember the Texas Tribune Festival in Austin every year in late September, festival.texastribune.org. I can guarantee you we'll be back to the Valley again soon. We love coming. It's important to be here. We appreciate all of you. See you soon. Thank you very much.
The Texas Tribune Festival will celebrate big, bold ideas from the worlds of politics, policy, and beyond. September 22nd through the 24th in Austin. More information at tripfest.org.